You're very welcome back. You're watching the Daily Rundown with me, Fiona Fox. Now, Manchester held its Pride celebrations over the weekend. But whilst the parade was in full swing, a group of activists staged a sit-in and blocked the Greater Manchester Police's float. Here to talk more about the protest are Jess Bradley and Dandy Flip from Direct Action for Trans Health. Hello.
Hello.
Jess and Dandy, thank you so much for coming in today. Because it's the first day, you've had a very busy weekend, obviously.
Yeah, that's very eventful.
It was very eventful. Right, I think before we get into the kind of events of the weekend, do you want to tell us a little bit about Direct Action for Trans Health?
Sure. Well, we are a campaign group, basically doing work around trans health primarily, but also equality in terms of employment, in terms of housing, in terms of imprisonment. And we basically feel that transgender and non-conforming people in this country are discriminated in numerous ways, and we've all been involved in various lobbying and various kind of campaigning in terms of official channels, and we felt that often those channels they're very slow. We don't feel listened to, so we kind of feel that actually the urgency of the situation means that we have to go into protesting and campaigning.
Right, okay. And do you want to tell us a bit about how your own involvement with the group and how that kind of came about?
Well,
whoever wants to hop.
I've been involved in the group for maybe a year or so. I knew about the group from Jess. We've been friends for quite a long time. A lot of my friends are involved as well, but I've been campaigning for trans issues for quite a number of years. I think it's something that's really quite important to focus on, but also to highlight to people who may not think about those issues. So, for example, the action that we did at Manchester Pride, obviously a lot of people were not expecting to see that, and I think that can be quite a good platform to kind of those issues can become visible.
Make yourself heard. And I think that I have said this because obviously one of our presenters in here, Ashley, she's been on the show quite a few times, and I think I've said before, it's the trans community does seem to be really having a moment, don't they? Now it's well, probably since maybe a year, would that be about right? A lot more, just more platforms. I think just people being more vocal, obviously a few celebrities. That's all been good, has it, for the movement? I guess the straight community assumes it's been good. Is that not the case?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. So with visibility comes people knowing more about you, but often what that means is you're finding an increase in hate crime because people are aware that we exist.
Right.
So whilst positive change is good and kind of slow, it does come with this element of a kind of backlash against the community itself. So in some ways it's good, and in some ways it can be quite fraught.
Yeah, and would you say, is that why part of the group's motivation would be to educate people, to bring awareness right across the board, obviously not just in kind of areas where there are issues? Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. It's not. There needs to be wholesale education and awareness, but I think a lot of existing trans organisations which do fantastic work, often their narrative is very much around inclusion into a kind of society that kind of doesn't value trans lives and asking for inclusion, whereas groups like Direct Action for Trans Health, what we're saying is actually society needs to fundamentally change. We need to look not just at including us into the structures that already are, but we need to look at stuff like housing and poverty and homelessness, and not just for trans people but for cisgender people too.
Sure. Well, tell us about the events of the weekend. I think my first kind of feeling about this would be there might be some people who would be surprised to hear that there was any kind of a protest. Obviously Manchester Pride is so positive. I think a lot of people might not understand why you took steps to arrange a sit-in for at that event. Would you agree with that? Or
I think certainly the reaction from the crowd was quite mixed. We did get a few positive people who actually joined our protest and came to sit down with us. We'd never met them before, so that was really quite exciting.
That's
but
great.
We did also get quite a lot of backlash at the time, and there was this kind of vibe from the crowd that we were spoiling their parade and their fun, where we saw this as an opportunity to protest the police presence at Pride, which we feel is completely counterproductive to LGBT inclusion. The police, we say, are systematically transphobic. They're also incredibly oppressive to do with people of colour. Minorities are disproportionately targeted by the police, and we feel this was incredibly against the ethos of supposed pride and inclusion, where we're actually seeing the police as an institution represented in full uniform marching with the people that they're kind of oppressing.
Right, so just so for the people at home, we do have some footage of the stuff from the weekend, so we'll just play that over as we speak. So obviously that's quite a strong stance, obviously, against Greater Manchester Police. Now, we did speak to them, and basically they commented that yes, that event occurred, and that was kind of the end of it. So I obviously have to take the stance that, you know, some people might feel that it's a bit harsh on the police. Do you think? Or maybe some people wouldn't. Some people might.
Some people,
but they might not fully understand why you would take such a harsh stance. Obviously, the police, you know, they're just there to do a job, aren't they? They're just there to kind of follow orders.
Yeah, I mean, it's an argument that we hear quite a lot,
Yeah.
and actually, I think when you look at the role of the police in society, you know, crime happens everywhere, and the police obviously have to prioritise where to spend their efforts. But what they tend to prioritise is spending their efforts on disproportionately on policing working class communities, policing sex workers, policing trans people, policing queer people, and people of colour. So. You don't necessarily see, you can kind of see the discrimination that the police inevitably go through, and that means in the courts people are discriminated against, and it means that the prison system as a whole is you know, disproportionately, we see people from marginalised and vulnerable backgrounds there, and the prison system itself is very harmful and brutalising, specifically for trans people, but for everyone really involved in it.
But the police, to be fair, Jess, aren't necessarily the ones who are inside in the prisons and that kind of thing. Like, so would you see this sit in as a stepping stone to actually getting your message out? Is this the beginning of your protest?
Yeah. So
sorry, would you agree with that? First of all, I mean, obviously the police, you know.
I mean, the police, I think, are complicit within it.
Right.
They know what the prison system is like, and they know what they're sending people to. But yeah, they are just kind of one part of a machine that includes the courts and the prison system and the prison guards. So I would say that they're not the sole focus of what we're doing, but they definitely aren't without blame.
And obviously there's been one or two high-profile transgender stories recently, haven't there been, about, you know, transgender women who've committed suicide while they've been in prison? And this will have contributed, these stories like this.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, Joanne Latham and Vicky Thompson were two trans women who were incarcerated in male prisons. They both committed suicide almost within months of each other because they were victims of that institutionalized transphobia that is kind of disproportionately targeting, well, in this case, trans women. But this is something that we felt we really wanted to highlight at the parade, and part of our protest was about that institutionalized transphobia which the police and the prison system are all complicit in. This is something that we felt was kind of completely inappropriate for the police to be marching when we had only last year 2 suicides of trans women who were incarcerated in male jails.
And we're just looking at footage that you took yourself while you were in the middle of the film. And I mean, fair play to you, it looks brilliant, and you obviously went about it in a nice, peaceful way as well, which is obvious. I think that always makes a difference. I think it's easier to get somebody to listen when you obviously go in with that kind of attitude. It's so interesting to hear from both sides, because a lot of people might think that to have the police, you know, bringing a float into the Manchester Pride, they might think that was a huge step forward. Yeah. But you guys don't agree with that one.
I mean, I think it's important to remember kind of the history of Pride as well. So Pride was an event to commemorate what was a trans-led anti-police riot, essentially the Stonewall riots in 1969. So that is the history of Pride. So
and the struggles, obviously.
Yeah, and there's obviously things have moved on, and but it doesn't mean that the issues still aren't there, and the issues with the police are definitely still there. So what we kind of see them as kind of putting on a friendly face, but actually in the meantime still carrying out these injustices against us.
Right. Right. Tell us your long-term plans. Where do you want to see this protest? Do you want this to go to Parliament? Where do you want? What is your plan?
So
what's your world domination plan? No, what is your plan?
So at the moment there's a new prison that's going to be built in Manchester.
Yeah.
It's a big US-style prison, and essentially we're supporting calls for a nationwide ban on the expansion of prisons. So that's kind of our next step, really, is to kind of to stop that prison from being built. Largely because prison is actually, when you look at the figures, it's a highly ineffective way of rehabilitating people. Recidivism rates are at 50%. It's also very expensive. You get housing somebody in prison for a year is 40 grand a year. So imagine just like paying for, someone to have housing, someone to have, you could pay for that with that money. And most people in prison are there for non-violent, acquisitive crimes. So
this is a bigger picture here.
It's a much bigger issue.
We're just pulling out a thread, really.
Exactly. Unraveling the jumper.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming in. We've run out of time, unfortunately. We could do with a longer slot, really, to be fair. But well done for the sit-down at the weekend, and best of luck with the future plans. Jess Bradley and Dandy Flip, thank you so much, guys. We're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be back in a few minutes with David and Arena's Something to Say. See you soon.